thinking it's 8 o'clock. It's 8 a.m. my time, which means it's probably 7 a.m. your time. So I'm very impressed with the dedication of educators to get up so early in the morning to learn more about family engagement. So I want to welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be able to explore kind of creative and community-centered ways to engage families in the secondary transition process. The session's called Strategies for Engaging Families in the Secondary Transition Process. Super easy to remember. But we're thinking, I want to help you, or today we want to push you to think beyond your usual strategies towards approaches that are grounded in family strengths, values, and the unique context of each of your communities. So here's what we will cover today. First, we're going to start by identifying kind of what traditional family engagement and secondary transition typically looks like, drawing from common practices that you may have already seen in schools and districts. Next, we're going to explore some innovative and community-driven strategies that kind of move beyond the traditional, focusing on approaches that are person-centered and responsive to family and student needs. From there, you're going to have opportunities to reflect on your own practices, share ideas with each other, and identify at least 2 strategies for engaging families that you can take back and apply to your own school or district. We'll then look at some methods for evaluating family engagement, because what we measure, we can improve. And so this will include thinking about how we assess not just whether families are involved, but how engagement impacts student outcomes. And so finally, we're going to close by developing or drafting out some action steps. Again, each of you are going to identify at least one new approach or tool that you can implement to strengthen partnerships with families and improve post-school outcomes for students with disabilities. As we move through today's sessions, please feel free to ask questions at any point. You can either drop them in the chat or simply unmute and jump in. I'd like this to be very interactive so that your insights and questions are really welcome throughout. And so I'll keep the chat open, but I've also asked Pam and Jen to monitor the chat for me. So if something like pressing comes up, then they can stop me as well to say, I need you to address this at this moment in time. So let's start with what many of us are most familiar with, which is traditional engagement. Traditional engagement often includes things like IEP meetings, or your individualized education program meetings. It could look like helping with homework or attending school events, or responding to school communication. While important, these approaches often kind of revolve around school-initiated activities and can feel very compliance-driven. So now, before I go any further, I want you to drop into chat. What comes to mind when you hear traditional family engagement? Maybe it's an activity you've seen most often, or something your school relies on. So take a few minutes. Drop in the chat. What comes to mind when you hear traditional family engagement? Newsletters that nobody reads. Awesome. Attending conferences, emails, parent-teacher conferences, surveys. Open house, resource nights, communication between home and school, family trainings, IEP meetings, resource fairs. Good. Going to one of those on tomorrow, actually. Excellent. Yeah, these are all very focused. I know most of them are either initiated at a school or probably happening in a school building too. So I just want to make a point about that. Some folks are using some new technology to communicate, trying to keep on track with the trends. I have also explored some of those new innovative ways for tracking or communicating to using, using text messages for one, which doesn't necessarily seem very innovative, but for some family, having a number that you can actually text versus just having a call is pretty out there, because some people prefer to communicate that way, but even using WhatsApp and other kinds of tools like that, Facebook Live and other, I don't know all the new apps, but there's lots of trending little communication apps that you can use. Those are all good examples. So what you'll notice is that most of these examples in the chat are really school-led. They really are kind of a one-size-fits-all. And families are often expected, not always, but often expected to show up in ways that work for schools, but not always in ways that work for them. So I want you to think about your own setting. How many families do you see at these traditional events compared to how many are actually represented in your classrooms or your caseloads? And my own experience in trying to facilitate, I'm a former special ed teacher and transition specialist, but I also currently am serving young folks who are 18 to 26 in inclusive higher education, and still working very closely with families. The families that we interact with often are not always representing all of the families I work with, right? So when I had family events, maybe 15% of the families I was working with showed up. So if you're comfortable, use the reaction button. If you notice a gap between who's invited and who actually participates, should be like a thumbs up or some kind of app or some kind of emoji. Awesome. Traditional methods can unintentionally exclude families whose work schedules don't necessarily align with the school hours. Traditional methods can unintentionally exclude families that may not speak the dominant language, or whose experience school systems as very unwelcoming in their past. So these approaches also tend to focus on deficits rather than recognizing the powerful strengths and networks that families bring. So by servicing these observations, we kind of set the stage for why non-traditional and person-centered approaches matter so much, and how we can create spaces for family voice beyond compliance-driven practices. So let's reframe engagement as a partnership, collaborative, ongoing, grounded in trust. Engagement is not just about attending meetings, it's about relationships. And when we value different types of capital, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, like social capital, cultural capital, linguistic and aspirational capital, we open up space for every family to be a meaningful partner. This is where person-centered approaches come in. These approaches prioritize listening and relationships. They ask what is important to the student and their family, what's important for their safety, their health, and their well-being, and how does the family define a meaningful life. As I reflect on my past experiences working with families and my current experiences working with families, the approach we take in higher education, we have really fully adopted this person-centered approach. It's a way of being. It's something that we do every day. It's not just a one-time meeting. We sit down. We're always collecting data on important to important for. What I have found is that this approach to engaging families and communicating on a regular basis and highlighting strengths has really shifted the way families engage, and recognizing and we state up front how our approach is slightly different than what's happened in their schools or their previous experience. But we also recognize that young adults are developing autonomy and decision-making skills. And at that same time, when they're doing that, parents and families' roles shift. They become more of a coach to their student versus the sole decision maker. And that's regardless if they have any kind of conservatorship or power of attorney. All of those methods are just strategies to support folks in decision making. And again, we recognize that we're all very interdependent. Nobody's fully independent. I personally rely on everybody in my household to even tell me what we're going to eat for dinner. So if we start to recognize that there is this importance of interdependence, and we need to make sure we think about all the different networks and leverage that capital, it really helps us kind of think differently about how we approach family engagement. So we have to start by listening. And I would say we could host structured conversations or informal check-ins, and that we would use guiding questions. So what are your hopes for your child? What does success mean to your family? These questions are simple, but they open the door for this powerful dialogue between the educators and the families. And you may have used some of these tools, but tools like PASS or MAPS or Charting the Life course can really help structure those conversations. So you should have received a handout titled Sample Listening Session Prompts. I believe it's also, Jennifer just put it in the chat. This handout really provides guiding questions such as, what does a good life look like for your child? Who are the most important people in your child's life? And here's how you can use it. So in practice, you can bring it to meetings with families to spark conversation and ensure their voice really is guiding planning. If you're using it in training with other teachers or other professionals within your school building, you can use it as a role play tool. Pair up and practice asking and responding to one or two of these questions, and just to see how naturally it leads to these deeper insights. I encourage you to review the prompts after today and consider which questions best fit your school or community context. You may want to adapt these questions or change them up a little bit. But by practicing with the prompts, we can model what it looks like to listen first, ensure that engagement is relational and not just procedural. Again, this actually just about a month ago, we were engaging in person-centered practices for a young man who is coming on to our campus who uses very limited verbal communication. And so he does have some other strategies that he uses, but not consistently. So he can write some words on paper, and he has an assistive technology device, but he doesn't, or an AAC device, but doesn't necessarily use it consistently either. So we started asking some of these reflective questions to mom and the young man. And the mom was, she was really excited to contribute. And so but we asked her to wait, which was funny. We said, can you wait a minute? Let's let your son share first. And we provided ample waiting time for her son to respond. And we started asking about who is important to the family. And for her son, again, because he can't say, oh, this person's super close to me, we gave him sticky notes. We wrote the names of the people we thought were close to him. So mom, dad, sister. He had a bunch of other folks, and mom had helped compile this list of people. And what she noticed is that because he just put the sticky notes on a circle that we had on the wall. And so the closer to the circle was the closer to him, further out was further out from him. And what she noticed is that he started to move them around. Like, so dad was real close to him at first, but then after a few minutes, he moved dad away and moved somebody else closer. And she started to argue about that. But then after at the end of the day, after we allowed him to process in his way and let him move, she sat up there and just stared. So at the end of the meeting, she's just staring at the circle. And she had a moment to reflect, and she goes, you know what? I think I understand what he was doing. Dad doesn't live near us anymore. He doesn't see dad very often. This person's my best friend. We talk every day. Now I understand why he moved them. So he was moving them based on his interactions with the people. But just having space, asking those reflective questions, allowing her son to be able to reflect on that was a really powerful experience and something she had not experienced before. And actually, the funny thing is his mom is also a special education teacher. So it was a really interesting interaction. But listening and allowing both families, because I could have stopped the meeting right then, right, and told her, I need you to hightail it out because I have something else going. But I didn't. I waited. I stopped. I allowed her to talk through what she was thinking and processing, and listening, and that helped kind of think about how we were going to support her young adult in the next coming weeks, which was kind of exciting. So again, not all families are comfortable in formal meetings. At our meetings, we have like every kind of gadget and toy possible, but we also let them choose where we meet, right? So we don't have to meet in my office. We can meet in the Culp Center. We can meet at a restaurant. We can meet at their homes if that's what they want. Some may prefer visual tools like one-page profiles or life mapping or photos that represent a good day. And these tools can provide an accessible way to share what matters most, especially when language or past experiences may be a barrier. For the young man that I was just referencing, what we have learned in the first few weeks of school is that he does like to use pictures that he has found on the internet to help communicate with people and to really demonstrate empathy. Now, does he always pick the right picture or the most appropriate picture for the context? No, but that's something we can help with as we go. So those pictures have really allowed him an opportunity and also allowed mom to think through, okay, we're using these at home. I didn't realize they were a communication tool. So engagement must also reflect what families already bring to the table. So whether it's social networks, cultural traditions, or aspirational hopes, these forms of capital are very valuable. We have to move beyond a school-centric view of involvement and recognize that the richness families already offer. And to support this, I've provided the Forms of Family Capital handout because, social capital or these forms of capital are not always like in the forefront of our minds. But the handout outlines 6 types of capital. So social, cultural, linguistic, aspirational, navigational, and familial, and with definitions and some concrete examples. So when we're thinking about how you might use a resource like this in practice, you might refer to the handout when preparing for your IEP or transition planning meetings to remind yourself of the strengths families may contribute. The strength of the family I just shared with is around their network and their community connections. They have huge social capital. They have a huge network in this community. They enjoy doing social activities. So I knew from the get-go that that was going to be a strength of this young man's when he came to campus. He was going to participate in everything the university had to offer. And when she described his experiences at school, he's at every ball game. He's at doing every kind of fun event. There's also, again, some linguistic capital. Mom she has strong communication skills, but she's not going to email you. She wants to chat or do a quick phone call. So recognizing those strengths are super important. Also understand the aspirational capital. A lot of times families aren't actually asked, what are their dreams of the future? What does a meaningful life look like in your eyes? What does that mean? It doesn't always mean that our young people are going to be competitively employed. In fact, some families just want their young people to experience happiness and a sense of belonging after they've exited high school or post-secondary education. Some are really driven by, I want them to be in competitive employment. I want them to make a wage. I want them to contribute to the household bills and incomes, right? So they're paying their fair share. And I've worked with families that are like that too. So again, it's really about understanding their stories. And again, they're not always going to just come out and tell you these things. That's why you go back to those questions I mentioned earlier. Some of those large prompts will get at some of this information and help you. But so when you think about the forms of capital handout, again, during planning meetings, you can refer to the handout and remind yourself of the strengths. If you're working with your staff teams, you can also use it as a reflection tool. You can ask colleagues to identify examples of the capital they've observed in families and have them share, again, building out your understanding of all the different various capitals. And then with families, you can share it to affirm that their networks, their traditions, their languages, their aspirations are not extras, but they are essential resources shaping their child's success. And I think that's probably one of the most crucial takeaways from this slide is that forms of capital are super essential for shaping the young adult's success. They are not extras, they are not add-ons, they are not something that we should be considering after the fact. By grounding engagement in these forms of capital, we're reframing families as partners who bring expertise, who bring history and resilience that really enrich in our planning and strengthen outcomes for young adults. So sometimes engagement needs to happen outside of school walls, which can be challenging, I understand, depending on where you are and how your day is organized. You know, in some states that I have been in, they have not been allowed to work outside of the school hours, right? But engagement has to happen. It has to be flexible. So we can host events in community spaces and offer some flexible meeting formats or send quick updates via text. So some of the traditional strategies, or what you all viewed as traditional strategies in the chat, could also help engagement be super flexible. We can also engage through churches or barbershops or WhatsApp groups. And we can bring in family liaisons and community connectors who are trusted by families. And sometimes that's really important. So like when we begin our person-centered planning process, we actually ask families, who are the folks that you trust and that are supporting you through this process? Would you like for them to be involved in the meeting? I feel like they may have some valuable contributions as well. So again, kind of getting allowing them to have some kind of autonomy about who is supporting. I will say in my own practice, I'm probably more flexible than most. You know, most families have my cell phone number, and I've told them it is okay to message me at any time. And I even let them know that, you know, I may get your message, but if I'm busy at the moment, I might not answer it right then, but I will answer it later. I do that only because I know sometimes thoughts come to families, you know, in their sleep, or most of my best thoughts come when I just go jump in the shower for some reason. I guess the cold water hitting my head just makes the brain start sparking. But if I allow them to go ahead and put the message in the chat or send me an email, and they know that I'll respond later, at least they're already got their ideas out there and I can consider them. Now, I actually will, you know, text back and forth on the weekends because I think my hobby is also my job. But again, I encourage you to set boundaries, but make those expectations or those boundaries very clear to your families. The key is to give them an outlet to communicate. So even if they're communicating at off hours, because if they work third shift, they're probably either going to give you a message during their break, or they're going to give you a message when they get off early in the morning. Allowing them to do that, but knowing that your response time is going to be different, just allowing them to understand the expectations. So I also encourage you to use tools like what's important to, what's important for charts to ensure student voices and family values are reflected in planning. I have learned so much over the years by just always asking questions. Now, the important to, important for is not something I sit down and do in one day. While we start this conversation initially in an initial person-centered planning, every day I am actually kind of balancing this what's important to, what's important for. I'll also, you know, we take pictures of students engaging in activities. Schools do this often too, right? If you've got students engaging in things, you're also taking pictures. Those are sources of data for you. Those pictures reveal a lot about a young person and what's important to them and what's important for them. If your families, again, if you are friends with families on social media, the images that they share also provide you information about what's important to and what's important for. So you can collect that information over time And then always bring it back to the students and families and say, you know, this is what I'm recognizing, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I'm seeing. Can you confirm if these assumptions are accurate? And then they can also tell you. But again, you want to ask questions like, what does the student need to thrive? What brings them joy or a sense of purpose? Those tools really help keep us or help us keep the student at the center with families as partners in planning. And I think that's the critical piece. I mean, we have moved, as we move from in early childhood, we start with family-centered services. Somehow, when we hit school age, we move away from family-centered. We focus really on student-centered without consideration of how those families involved. But then when we get back to secondary transition, we're trying to pull the families back in. When in fact, we should always be student-centered with families as partners in planning. And so families are providing input along the way. They are a huge source of information for how to best support young people in their transitions, whether that's transition from elementary to middle, middle to high, high school to adulthood. So it's kind of critical that we kind of balance these and what's important to, what's important for. So let's look at a few more real world strategies. Home visits or check-ins. You know, while I know that's not always feasible, I will say during my tenure as a teacher in schools and a transition specialist in schools, and even now as I still continue to serve families and young adults, visiting a home and meeting with them in a place where they're comfortable is telling. You get a lot more information when you're able to do that. Now, there are some, safety checks and things you need to have in place, but even virtual check-ins, if they would be willing to do a virtual check-in from their home, there's a lot you can tell from a Zoom screen. I mean, if you look at my screen, well, you can't see it right now, but depending on where the angle is, right? You see that I have lots of books behind me. If it was slightly different, you would notice I have a skeleton sitting on a refrigerator. You might see I have a school bus that says Dolly Parton is president. I mean, these things really tell you a lot about a person, right? So Dolly is president. Well, you can assume that Dawn Rowe is like a Dolly Parton fan, right? That gives you information to start conversations and find common interest and build trust with families. So even if you're only able to do it virtually, I still think you can be a really keen observer and collect information to help you do that. Family storytelling nights is also a really cool idea. Again, families love to share stories. And they can be fictional or truthful, but having them come in and be a part of that really tells you a lot about young people. Community-based transition events, I think some of you put that in the chat already. Those are actually really good opportunities. The one that I'm attending tomorrow, actually, all of the vendors actually drafted questions. And then the school system's actually pulling those questions together so that when families come up to the vendors, they know what to ask. Because a lot of times when we do these big family transition events, we just throw families in there and they're like, oh, here's like 100+ different resources you need to know about. But we don't actually prepare them to engage with those people. And so I commend this school district for doing that. They're collecting information. So 3 to 5 questions that families could ask when they go up to. So it's not about just picking up whatever swag's on the table or whatever handout. They're forced to ask you some questions and start generating that conversation. Again, that helps them to build their networks. So it goes back to that social capital. We're helping families develop additional capital as they're moving through the process with their young adults. Parent advisory groups are also good ways to kind of engage families in a different way. All of these methods build trust. They align engagement with the rhythms of everyday life. So that's, again, when you think about non-traditional, it's about how do we ensure engagement aligns with the rhythms of everyday life so that it's accessible to families. A lot of families want to engage, but the types or the ways we are reaching out are not accessible to them. They want to engage in a different way, or they they feel like their strengths are different and they would be able to engage in a different way if it was offered. So really thinking creatively about how we do that. So I'm going to take a minute to reflect, and we're going to break out into some breakout groups, and then you'll come back. We're going to do it probably, I will give you, so it's 8:30. Let's break out for about 8 minutes, but I want you to reflect with your groups. How are you currently engaging families and what challenges do you face? And then if you've engaged in some of these non-traditional strategies, have they worked for you? I think Jennifer and Pam are going to help me break out. We're going to do 8 minutes and then we'll come back together and then I'll ask a few of you to report out. Again, this is a volunteer share, so, and we probably do, maybe we have enough time to do maybe 2 or 3 people. If you want to just unmute and start sharing, that will work for me.
We did have some really good ideas in our group. So a couple folks spoke to that families get to a transition fair, but they don't often know how to interact. And they were thinking about like an ambassador or pairing them with other families that have been through the process, and that case managers just can kind of help make those connections. And then just helping prepare families and agencies for the fair ahead of time, what are questions? But I thought it was a great idea, just, being able to, sometimes you're that facilitator and helping them make connections with other families that have been through the process. You can ask those families if they're okay with you sharing that contact. Just sometimes help building other supports and a network for them.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley, for sharing. While I did not bring it with me today or have a direct link to it, NTACT does have a transition fair toolkit that includes kind of how to do some of those things, gives you a structure for planning. I think in our group, we did talk a bit about the amount of time it takes to do some of those events. And when you add that layer of preparing families to actually participate, it takes even more time. So it's not something you can plan in a few days. Sometimes it's a year coming or 6 months coming to invest in that. But we do have that resource if it's something you're interested in, and I'll make sure that Jennifer and Pam get it. How about somebody else?
Hello, Chris Reinhardt from Oak Creek High School. I think one thing we talked about as well, it's just like starting that education process for families at a younger age. And that's one of their goals. I know in Oak Creek and another speaker in our group also spoke to was, can we provide more information to these families, providing them, just more knowledge coming into the high school, right? Like we're not starting this process at 15, 16, 17, but really the thought process and planning should be starting in that middle school time, right? So it's like just getting more involvement, right? Engagement at a younger age.
Yeah, Chris, that's a great point. I would argue, I'd argue start at birth, but elementary works too. Because some of the decisions that families are making in elementary school are going to impact them for a lifetime. And I'll give you an example from Tennessee specifically, because that's where I'm from. We have what they're called comprehensive development classrooms, CDC, life skills classrooms. They're just self-contained classrooms, basically. When you make a decision to go in that self-contained classroom, typically you're also making a decision to do a different diploma track pathway, right? So it's mostly functional life skills versus accessing the general education curriculum. When you move into those kinds of classrooms in elementary school, you're setting the trajectory that that's the route you need to go. So when you get to high school, your diploma options are very limited, right? Without a standard high school diploma, the doors close after high school, right? So you don't have access to all the post-secondary education opportunities. You don't have access to all the employment opportunities, particularly. So some of those early decisions make a big difference in their trajectory. I mean, another really good example too is adult services. Many of our adult service agencies have waiting lists that are long, right? I mean, 600,000 people deep. Takes a lot of time to get through some of those. And so if you make a decision not to access or apply or get interested in those services at a young age, then you could you risk the chance that you will not get the services in a timely fashion after they exit high school. So again, some of those questions, and I would agree that giving information early is important, but giving it in small chunks, again, so it's really digestible and they understand the relevance. And not every family needs everything, right? So, students with special healthcare needs are going to need a lot of information about managed care and other health-related things. Or folks with intellectual disabilities will need something around their Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, whereas folks with learning disabilities may only need vocational rehabilitation and some other adult services. So just thinking and being mindful of what they need and providing it when. Okay, for sake of time, I'm gonna keep going. I appreciate you all taking the time to share. I think this was really important and productive conversations that we've had. All right, so I think when we think about, I want to move slightly into evaluation and how do we know if our engagement efforts are working or not? Because I asked, the question I asked is, did you think that your traditional or non-traditional ways were effective in engaging families? I will say I was working with Rowe, who I always say is a sister from another mother. We're not related, but we have the same name. She's the director of the Parent Training Information Center in Hawaii, actually. And she and I do a lot of work out in the Republic of the Marshall Islands together because we train families together out there. And one of the things that she stresses is there's a real distinct difference between involvement and engagement, right? So involvement means you might have gotten them there, right? They showed up. But engagement means that they're actively participating, they're engaging in decision making. And so when we think about engagement, it's more than just attending a meeting. And we want to think about what's working. So I will say if it's not just about counting attendance, we want to ask questions like, are families contributing meaningfully? Are their priorities heard? Are students gaining more voice in their own planning? These are the kinds of questions we need to think about so that we're going beyond involvement where they show up, but they're actively contributing to the conversation. So we can use a variety of tools to collect this information. And I think, again, I saw in the chat where some of you had been or have used some of these methods previously. So like family surveys, focus groups, participation logs, student goal tracking. I mean, there are some curriculum out there now that allow students to craft goals, but then also share those goals with other people, their families, their teachers, their friends, so that everybody can be involved in helping them, holding them accountable to meeting those goals. These types of methods really help capture both the quality and the impact of engagement, so not just quantity. So again, evaluation is moving beyond quantity and looking at quality and impact of engagement. I've also included the family engagement reflection tool. It's also posted in the chat. This tool helps schools and partners look beyond those surface level measures of engagement, such as attendance counts. Instead, it's providing a structured way for you or your team to reflect on how families are contributing and how engagement efforts are actually supporting student outcomes. Reflection is a critical part of evaluation. So while data can tell us how many families attended, reflection helps us understand what those families shared, how their input shaped planning, and where improvements can be made. So this tool guides this process by focusing on 5 areas. So the first area is really contributions and participation. How are families sharing priorities, their stories and resources, and whether families are co-planning rather than just responding. Again, in my career, I've worked with lots of families, and some just respond. They're passive participants in the process, and we want them to actually be active participants in the process. Cultural alignment and respect. This is how families' perspectives are acknowledged in planning and decision making. So again, reflecting on that. How are we doing that? Again, I think doing that important 2, important 4 activity, and always going back kind of like a member check to families to think about this, and recognizing that they may do differently and helping them confirm. That's a way to respect and make sure things are aligned. Student self-determination. So how student voices and choices are supported, and whether goals reflect both family hopes and student interest. That's really important in transition planning, because it's very easy to just start planning on what the family desires and then lose sight of student voice. We want to keep student voice at the forefront and help them understand there is no goal too lofty. I mean, sometimes we say, oh, that post-school goal is not obtainable for somebody. But that post-school goal is not necessarily for us to say, how are we going to reach it? It's to help us plan for it and help us decide what exactly it is they want to do, right? So even if they say they want to be or play for the Packers, right? Since we're in Wisconsin, we'll go for Cheeseheads. But if they want to say they want to be Packers, that's fine. Put that goal on the IP goal, but do some more sleuthing, right? Ask some families some real reflective questions, because you might find out that they really enjoy the football games because they go with dad, right? And they have this valuable time with dad. So it's not necessarily an employment goal, but it is a social goal and a family goal that they want to continue. It's a family tradition that they want to continue. And so, but there may be things that they've seen at a football game that they really think are interesting, like the ticketing, like communicating with people coming in at the door. One of the young men I worked with, he was all about security. So he wanted to be the person to help keep people safe and to direct traffic. And so, we got him a job at Access Security locally, which is a local security company, and they're the ones who do all the security at the major events. His first paid position with Access Security was the Miranda Lambert concert, and he was just thrilled with it. So, so sometimes those big picture goals, again, if you're listening actively to families, can help you understand better what it is they want to do. Accessibility and inclusion. So whether engagement opportunities are offered in flexible formats and times that work for families, again, that is a really important part of this work. And then the last kind of category is outcomes and impact. So how family impact shows up in transition planning or in the IEP. So, I mean, in the IEP, you can think about partnerships. I mean, are families actually showing up as somebody who's going to deliver the service or support? Or is there a service that's included in the IEP to help build capacity of the family? So you really are looking at how partnerships are strengthened, what evidence exists of student growth and independence, employment, and participation. So again, when you're thinking about in practice, you might want to select a recent meeting or event that you've hosted and work through these guiding questions. Identify the strengths, identify growth areas, and identify your next steps. And by revisiting a tool like this regularly, such as like once a semester, you kind of create this ongoing cycle of reflection and improvement. So it should be kind of embedded in your continuous improvement process. This ensures that evaluation doesn't just measure numbers, but strengthens the quality of family partnerships over time. So research shows that stronger family engagement leads to better outcomes. There's no question in that. Students are more likely to participate in their IEPs. They are more likely to pursue meaningful goals and transition successfully into adult life. So engagement is not just nice. or family engagement is not just nice, it really is necessary to support students in achieving those positive outcomes that they want to achieve. So again, what do we want to remember? Engagement should reflect each community's context. So engagement is going to look different in all your schools and your districts, and it could even look different with each family that you work with. Every family brings unique strengths. Non-traditional approaches can be more inclusive and more effective, and evaluation helps us improve and tell our story of impact. So before we close today, I want you to write in the chat, or if you're not comfortable writing in the chat, write it down on a piece of paper in front of you or a notepad. One strategy you'll take back to your school team. Something that you heard today that you want to try or explore further. And then I want to take a minute to share it out. Again, you can share it in the chat now, and I'll talk through a few minutes. Commit to at least one step. Thank you for sharing, Wendy. Looking for opportunities to meet families in their environment and community versus at school, right? Let's show up at their community events. See them in the grocery stores. Those of you that live in rural parts of Wisconsin probably do see all of your students in the grocery stores. I know I do here in the rural parts of Tennessee. Engaging families beyond school-based activities, meeting elsewhere. I have been known to meet families at the Bojangles over gravy biscuits, which has been, it's really enlightening when you give them food they really love. I like the idea of putting down the goal and finding the part they like and they can do. Yeah, that has been truly eye-opening for me over the years. Building middle school and high school teacher understanding of transition services. Information is not only coming from one person, that's good. And having consistent ways to communicate with families across middle and high school is great. Remind groups. Oh, that's a good one for transition families. So you're building out family networks so families can start to problem solve with each other. Excellent. Community festivals and events. Those are all great examples. So I'll pause here. We have some additional resources on our website, and you can contact us anytime. I'll put my contact in the chat too, in case folks want to email me again. I'm pretty accessible. If I don't respond back pretty immediately, follow up because it probably is lost in cyberspace. And so I'm gonna pause there because we're almost at time and give folks opportunity to ask questions. Let me stop sharing. You're very welcome, Chris.
When you leave today's meeting, you will have a pop-up survey. We ask that you please do that as well.